Hey y'all, happy Baby Friday. It is Betty with Compliant Healthcare Solutions here, and thank you for joining me for this session of Healthcare Happenings. If y'all, as y'all are joining, please go ahead and pop some comments in there to let Pam and I know that y'all are here and that you're watching with us. And speaking of Pam, I'm very happy to welcome my guest today, Pam Vanderbilt. Hey, Pam.
Hey, Betty, how are you?
Good, thank you. Pam is the owner of Knowledge Tree Billing. And so we thought it would be a good idea to discuss revenue cycle management, RCM, and like all the stuff that is necessary to relook and make sure you're doing now that 2023 has started, right? So we have some people coming in. We had Tammy saying hi. Hi, Tammy. Oh, Lady is there.
There's
Hey,
Lady.
Lady. I love Lady. She's so nice. Over in the Orange Irvine chapter. And Tammy Weaver, what she said, I thought I was the only one who said you all. I don't say you all, I say y'all.
Y'all.
But yes, y'all and all of that stuff. So Taylor saying Happy New Year. Happy New Year, Taylor. See, I had to put this up for you, Pam. So lady said you look
Oh,
amazing.
thank you, Lady. And Beth Sleeper, it's afternoon.
Yeah. Well, it depends on where she's watching from, though.
She's in Arizona.
Uh, yeah. So it's still afternoon there, right? It's noon
Yep.
there, noon or one. Yeah. Yeah. So
It's
still
12 o'clock.
afternoon.
This time of year, they're 2 hours behind us.
Oh, that's right, because they don't move. So it depends on when we're
Yeah.
looking. Um, all right, so we are going to talk about RCM today, and I thought Pam was a good person to bring in on this discussion because of her background. So Pam, as I said, she's the owner of Knowledge Tree Billing. So Pam, I want you to kind of talk. I'm going to ask you some questions so that everybody else can kind of get to know you if they're not already familiar. It looks like we have a couple of Pam fans out there that are saying hey. So we have some people that are familiar with you now, but for people that might be listening later. So uh, looking at your LinkedIn profile, I know you work for NamUs. You have your own company now, as I said, and have held positions in like a neuro practice. I think I saw, was it ortho? Am I right or no?
Mhm. Oh,
Okay.
yes.
So tell us about your journey, like how long you've been in the healthcare field and how you've moved through to where you got today.
So I started in healthcare when I was newborn. I've
Me
been
too.
doing it for 27 years. And I actually started in the healthcare industry by accident. I had been staying at home with my kids and I was bored out of my mind. And some friends of ours who owned a medical practice were looking for a switchboard operator. And I was like, okay, great. It's a way to get out of the house. And so I started on a switchboard in an OBGYN office, and the switchboard just happened to be located in the billing office. Well,
Oh,
answering the phones all day or when the phones aren't ringing, not having anything to do all day can be kind of boring. And so I went out to the girls in the billing office. And I'm like, y'all have to give me something to do. And this was back in the days when medical manager was the system to have. And if anybody's ever used medical manager, you'll recognize this. But they would print out the request for review, which was basically the outstanding aging report for an insurance company. And I would get on the phone and I would call up Blue Cross Blue Shield of Florida and say, hey, why haven't you paid us? I didn't know anything about coding, billing, anything. I was just asking questions like I was told to ask them. And I am telling you, unlike today, back then you could get on the phone, you would get the same people over and over again.
yeah.
And you could get on the phone and actually get to know the reps from Blue Cross and Blue Shield. And, they were only supposed to do 5 claims on a call, but if they were quiet, they'd sit there and do 10 or 20 of them. It was a
Right.
completely different relationship than it is today. And so I learned very literally from the back end forward the way most of us learn. because I didn't know what an E&M code was. I didn't know what a modifier was. And between the girls in the billing office and the ladies at Blue Cross and Blue Shield, I got to know a lot of stuff. And so as positions opened up, I moved to the front desk, and I don't know, my personality is one of those that kind of takes control. So um, I wanted to know everything, and I was that person that wasn't afraid to make a decision, even if it wasn't necessarily in my authority to do so. Um, so, well, sometimes you just need to make a decision. If a patient is not happy, you have to feel confident in giving them an answer that's going to benefit both the patient and the provider. And a lot of people won't do that. That's just not my personality. So, but as my career progressed, I moved through multiple positions, eventually becoming practice administrator. And then I moved to Atlanta, and I took a job as the director of compliance for a large orthopedic practice up there. And that experience, seeing how revenue cycle worked in a large practice, which is different than a smaller practice, was an incredibly enlightening experience, and has really helped shape my perspective of revenue cycle and what's important and what's not. Um, Not to mention, I have to give credit because compliance plays a piece in everything we do in healthcare, and the revenue cycle
Yes.
is a piece that compliance falls in. So my time at Doctors Management after I left the ortho practice really helped fill in some blanks that I didn't know were blank when I was still working in the practice. So.
Of the specialties, and this is just an off question, and I'm not trying to offend any other specialties out there, but do you have a favorite? Did you have a favorite that you like the best?
Um, I think from a specialty perspective, ortho is my favorite,
Yeah.
but I really like doing primary care, family practice, internal medicine type stuff.
Yeah.
I enjoy because you kind of get to know the patients,
Yes.
even though you
Yeah.
don't meet them, you get to know the patients, you know.
I said from a coding perspective, I would say not the actual coding, but I used to like it when I did ED stuff because I would like read in through the scenarios of what happened in the ED to that,
Oh
like
yes.
what happened to that patient, because we could I read some pretty crazy stuff,
Mhm.
so those were always fun when I was doing ED coding too. I like doing that. But and never told stories though, HIPAA, we have to,
Exactly, exactly.
but but yeah, you could get some interesting things looking at from ED. Same thing with family practice, because a lot of
Oh
times
yeah.
we'd have patients that would show up when I worked in an internist office, and I'm like, why didn't you go to the hospital? It's like, what is wrong with you? But sometimes people, they said we had a patient came in one time with his wife. It was after I was in Illinois at the time, and there was a big tornado that had come through Plainfield over there and had just like wiped out the town. And our practice was wherever this patient lived, there was the patient's house, then there was a hospital, then there was our practice.
Oh my
The
goodness.
patient's wife had a heart attack, drove past the hospital, and came to our practice. And I was just like, seriously, I was like, did you not see that? But he was like, you get that short circuit that when they're in a panic, they were thinking of their doctor. And
Exactly.
so that's where they came. And so we ended up calling the ambulance, and the doctor went and rode in the ambulance with them to get them to the hospital, So I was like, oh man. But you do get that really bonded relationship to where that's what the patient thinks about,
Exactly.
which is very nice in a way, but sometimes could be a little scary because it was just like, yeah, next time, 911 or
Don't
if you're
drive.
passing, if you're passing the hospital, maybe just stop in there, So,
Yep.
but so doing all of those things and being in compliance and then being with doctors management, what kind of shifted you into where you got into the billing lane? What was it about billing that you were like, okay, that's me. That's what I want to sit in.
One of the things that I noticed working for doctors management, uh, we had, so there are enterprise clients there, but they also help manage smaller practices, and the compliance division where where I worked, the auditors and stuff like that, kind of went down two different paths. And my clients predominantly were our management clients. And so you think about that single provider practice that might not normally have audits. I audited them. I did the education. But through that process, I realized that because they're a smaller practice, they don't usually have the money to pay somebody with the level of experience that you would hope you have doing your billing, running your billing revenue cycle part. And so they had outsourced their billing. And when I was giving them education feedback on their audit results and how things were documented versus how they were coded and use of modifier 25 and, all of those different things, I kept hearing over and over again, well, our billing company does that. Our billing company does that. I don't know. I didn't put that diagnosis code on there. Look here, this is the diagnosis code I gave. I don't know how that diagnosis code got on the claim. And I was like, okay, this you can't do this. You've
Yeah.
got if and I'm not taking anything away from other billing companies out there. I know that there are
Yeah.
some really, really good billing companies out there, and I know that there's probably a reason that they did something if they did it.
Hmm. Hmm.
However, um, they were just so in those conversations, they were so separate. It was like me talking to you about going to Macy's. Macy's has nothing to do with my household. Those billing companies had nothing to do with the practice household. It was
Yeah.
just distinct. And I'm like, no, 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 no. A billing company needs to be a department of the practice. It needs to be integral and part of, and there needs to be communication all of the time, and there needs to be feedback. And the other thing that I kept learning was these people weren't coders. They
Yes.
didn't understand how to pick a level of E&M service. They didn't understand how to read documentation and give feedback to a provider. And so things were going on in these practices that should have been caught at that billing part and were not caught because the people who were doing the billing weren't trained. And so I was like, all right, I got to do something about this, and thankfully, I have to give a lot of credit to doctors management. We were talking a little bit before we started that I don't have to market, knock on wood, but a lot of that is because I get referrals from the management consultants at doctors management, from their clients who need help or are opening a new practice and need to start correctly.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, that's just kind of where the passion is. I love educating.
Yeah.
That is my heart. But this is a way to have access to be able to have those conversations with the providers and continue to help, um, when I'm not speaking. So,
Great. Now, I had a lady put up a question for you, asking how many specialties have you worked in?
uh, pediatrics, internal medicine and family medicine, OBGYN, general surgery. I have a breast surgeon, which is technically a general surgeon, but they are very specialized. Um, Neurology, neurosurgery, ortho spine, specifically ortho spine, and then ortho, GI. I know I'm leaving stuff out. I have audited for every specialty known to man, and some of them I didn't
Right.
know what I was doing. I had to go get help. I am telling you, RADONC is its own thing,
Yes.
and you have got to be specially trained to be able to understand what you're looking at. So,
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. When I would say, out of all the stuff, because I'm like you, I'm very broad based in specialties that I've been exposed to. But for me, the one that would cause me issues was always anesthesia. And I have a good friend, Tanya Bevan, and she does anesthesia and has been doing it like forever. And it wasn't the actual, billing out the anesthesia itself. It's all of the, when you've got the groups and they're in 2 or 3 different surgeries at the same time, and so you get the graphs and you have, or the pie chart, and the minutes are overlapped. I'm like, y'all are giving me a migraine. I'm like, it's just
Yep.
like, no, thank you. So that's the one for me when I have to audit it. I'm like, who, because of all of that, the inner workings and that billing issue part of it, that if you don't have that right, that's not going to be coming out
Nope.
too well, so
Exactly.
that's the one for me that gives me the headaches, that I'm just like, I'd rather not, is there anything else you have on your plate? Like,
Exactly.
seriously. But yeah. Oh, and somebody's saying, well, good, Catherine, you can have all of it. She loves
Oh, yes.
anesthesia. So that's good for her.
We'll call you, Catherine.
That's right. And the thing with that I see, like Rosamine had posted a thing on LinkedIn, I think it was yesterday or today, that I was looking about, billing company, about a person that had put a post up on LinkedIn and said that she was being asked by a physician to do billing for them. And she was asking for people's advice because she'd never done it before and didn't know what to do. And, I'm like, well, I think maybe my first piece of advice would have been, don't do it. You're not doing yourself, or definitely not that practice, a favor. I think billing and coding, I think, was more thought of when I first started it back in the, well, years ago.
When you were first born.
That's right. We didn't call it coding. They didn't have coding positions. They were, and it was looked at like, I would be in a practice and it was like, well, Shirley's putting charts away today. She can do this coding stuff. Let her do it. Or I would have the physicians. I had one office. The physician told me, well, I do it at night when I'm in front of the TV set. And when I get down and I see that there's like 3 of them that kind of look the same, I just pick one of them. And, that's how, you would hear things like that, because coding didn't have the, I don't want to say necessarily the respect, but not the understanding of really how financially imperative it was in a practice. And I think coding, because of all the audits and the paybacks and all this stuff, is getting more of that. They're really realizing it. I think billing is still a little on the back end of that. They're still coming up, but I think there's still a lot of physicians' practices that just think, well, yeah, anybody can do this here, because a lot of them still do that pass through, where it's just like, I put it on the encounter form, I give it to you, whatever's on there, that's it. You don't,
Yep.
they think that it's more of, like a key entry thing, and then somebody pushes a button for you and does your posting. They don't really
Right.
understand what RCM, what fully encompasses revenue cycle management, and that a billing service is not just a button pusher. It's not
Right.
just somebody that's just like, here this is, and here I'm just going to key entry all your payments for you, and that's what I do.
Right.
Carried in with coding and are just as important, if not, in some practices, heavier so, as far as the financials of the practice.
Yes, absolutely. And it's not just the back end either. It's I think what a lot of practices fail to recognize, to your point, billing, coding, revenue cycle is not just data entry. And it really starts at the front. It's the initial contact with the patient, whether that's in a call center for the patient to schedule an appointment, or the person at the front desk that's greeting them and doing check-in. If those people are not knowledgeable and don't have a firm understanding of the information that we need from that patient in order to get paid, we're not getting paid. I don't care how good the rest of the cycle is.
Yep.
And so I think that a lot of practices miss the boat because they consider those initial contact people secretaries, receptionists.
Yeah.
They still paid them that way. And so
Yeah.
it's a revolving door, and training new people costs money, it costs time,
Yep.
and you can't afford to do that. I know if I had to say the most important job in the revenue cycle, I'm going to tell you it's your front desk people, and they should be paid accordingly. Um,
Agreed.
train them correctly. You're going to lose them. You're going to eventually lose them to the back end of the revenue cycle, but that is where the investment really needs to be made, because if we get it there to start with, we can train the rest of it.
Yep.
Um, and so, that's really where the revenue cycle starts. There is not a department in a medical practice that revenue cycle doesn't touch. And a lot of
Amen.
times people think, oh, well, that's just the clerical end or the business end. We're clinical. We don't have anything to do with revenue cycle. Well, yes, you do. Because if you're the medical assistant that's giving that injection or doing a venipuncture and you don't put the codes into the system correctly, it's not getting billed or paid. If
Yep.
you're the provider that didn't document what you did appropriately and didn't identify it when you do your charge entry, you're not getting paid for it.
Yep.
So it doesn't matter where you are, you touch the revenue cycle.
Yep.
Um, it amazes me sometimes, and I think that's part of the perspective that we try to bring. A lot of my clients are single provider practices. I end up doing a lot of management for these
Yeah.
practices, because they don't have practice managers. But I have
Yeah.
to tell them, you've got to find the right people on that front desk, and
Yes.
everything else will flow appropriately. We can train the rest of it.
Yeah. I have a quick comment, a little story about the front desk kind of issue, but then I have a couple other questions I wanted to ask you about your company, like your knowledge tree name, because it intrigued me. But when I went to this one practice, and they had been rounding through front desk people because they didn't kind of see, they didn't pay appropriately, and it was looked at as, that, oh, they just answer phones, and I was like, well, they answer phones, they greet patients, they check out patients, they check in patients, they check their insurance, I'm like, when you start running down all the things these poor people at the front desk do, predominantly women, especially back then when I was, doing stuff. And I said, so, how long do you expect somebody, unless they really love you, doctor, or really love this practice, or really, they're not going to put up with like being beat down day after day after day for way too long here. So, you can have that revolving door on the front desk, and that's where you get in that danger area where, I don't know, the last person might have done this, or I don't know if they did it or not, or they had the stuff, but they didn't put it into the system. And, then you're always cleaning up after stuff. And I was talking about to the physicians about the dangers of, using abbreviations, and, make it, especially since, the front desk people might not be, that in tune with terminology and acronyms, and, they needed to make sure that they were educated correctly. And this physician would always put LBP on his encounter form. This is back, when we had the encounter forms that patients would all check out with. And I was sitting at the front desk with the front desk lady, and I had looked, and I said, what do you think that means? And she said, low blood pressure. So she was coding them all as having hypotension. That's the ICD-9 back then. That's the ICD-9 code she was putting in the system. And I said, how do you know that that's low blood pressure? And she looks, and I was very nice at the end of this, but she picks up the encounter form, and she looks at it, and she points to each letter. Low blood pressure, she says to me. And I was like, okay. So she kept, now, mind you, this was a surgeon that was working. And so I said, let me have that back. So I went back, and I said, hey, doc. And he said, yeah. And I said, you put LBP on that encounter form? And he said, yep. And I said, what do you mean? He said, low back pain. I said, oh, okay, thanks. So I went back up to the front desk and I said, just talk with the doctor. And she said, yeah. And I said, he said, low, but no. I, I said, he meant pain. And she sat there for a second, and then you could see on her face, just that look. And it was and she started. She says, and I said, yeah. And she said, well, I, I've been doing that for like 4 months. For 4 months, every patient that had that acronym on there was getting diagnosed as having hypotension because
Wow.
she didn't understand what that was, because they didn't think that there was a need for them to understand that stuff, that anybody could do that job, and I'm like, no, I said that this is all kind of issues here going on, so we got them all straightened out, but it's like stuff like that, it can't just be anybody taking that position. And then when you put people in those positions, you have to invest in those people so that they understand what they're doing in a medical practice, for everybody to work like a well-oiled machine, right?
Exactly.
So my other question that I wanted to ask you was knowledge tree. I really dig that name, but where did you come up with that name?
So I have to give credit to my husband. When he and I actually dated in middle and high school, and they moved away, and we lost connection. And because that was before, Facebook and all the stuff we have now. And we reconnected in 2009 through Facebook, and I moved up to Atlanta, and his company was Knowledge Tree Consulting. And I asked him, how'd you get the name of your company? And it was because his company was all about education. And when he thinks about education, he pictures in his mind the knowledge tree and the
Uh,
elder sitting under the tree with the student at their knee learning. And then he throws in, and then the apple falls out of the tree and hits the student on the head, and they have an aha moment. And that just really stuck with me. So, Knowledge Tree Consulting is his business. But when it was time for me to pick a name for my business, it just very easily was, yeah, that fits too well for my personality and what I want to accomplish. And so it was Knowledge Tree Billing.
oh, cool. And of course, there's a code for that, right?
Of
So
course, there is a code for that.
you have to
It's
ask his
going to start with an
permission to steal
F.
it.
So, but yeah, it was just it just clicked when he did that. And it's funny when we're watching TV or the movies or things, sometimes you'll get a scene in a show that has this field, and it has this big sprawling tree, and it's like, ah, there's the knowledge
There it
tree.
is. And I think there's a publishing company, a medical company that does publishing, that they've got that giant tree in theirs, and I always think of that
Yeah,
when I see that
yeah.
logo too.
It
Um,
is not, however, he quickly informed me it's not the biblical knowledge tree where Adam and Eve made poor decisions under that knowledge tree.
yeah, well, I think I want to pass on that tree, right?
Yeah.
Uh, when we're talking about RCM, again, it seems from a lot of the comments we're getting that most of the people that are involved in this discussion are very well versed on RCM. But just in case, for people that are watching that may be like, okay, they keep saying RCM, RCM, what. So I just pulled my definition of revenue cycle management, which is what RCM stands for, is like the marriage between the business and the clinical side of the practice. When,
Absolutely.
as you were saying, you have to make sure that you're checking things off and that you're doing things, and whatever they're doing is getting input and getting properly coded and sent out to the insurance company. So does that kind of fit with your, definition?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great definition of revenue cycle because, we're talking about the money. At the end of the day, even though we're talking healthcare, it is still a business, and the goal of a business is to make money. but it is a unique business. It's completely unlike McDonald's and Walmart and the grocery store, wherever you shop, because we are dealing with the lives of people. And
Yes.
so it is very different. But if we don't get the revenue cycle piece or that business side in sync with the clinical side, we are not going to have a successful business and we will not have the means to help people.
Yeah, and that's always when I talk to physicians and practices, I always put that, you know, they could be doing services all day long. They could be the best docs anywhere. They could be in surgery every day and they could just have millions and millions and millions of stuff going. But if it is not coded out and billed out correctly, you're going to have to shut your doors.
Yep.
And when you want new equipment, when you want new things or the latest technology that's come out, that'd be so helpful for my patients. Well, if you can't pay for it, you need money in the door to be able to do those things to help improve and help keep helping your patients. So, that's how it kind of just all's got to be fitting together and running together. Uh,
Exactly.
and then we were talking before we went live about, the big phases then of revenue cycle. And that's where we wanted to talk to today about, things to kind of look for now that the new year has begun.
Right.
So you've got the claims preparation issues, and that's where you're having your front desk stuff and people coming in, you're getting their IDs and you're getting their insurance cards and you're making sure their names are spelled right and all of this kind of stuff. And then your claim submission part where, if you're using a claims clearinghouse or however you're submitting claims, again, I'm so old in this, y'all, that I used to have to type them on a typewriter before we got onto, and hand sign them every
I've
Friday.
handwritten them a few times.
Oh, that was signing claims. I hated that day. That's all I did all Friday because you couldn't use a stamp. It had to be a signature.
Yep.
So and then claims management coming back, working the denials and posting the payments, making sure they're getting done right, because now you have the electronic funds transfers, the EFTs and automatic posting and all that kind of stuff. Again, back in the day, we would have stacks of checks and stacks of EOBs with checks, and we had to stamp and do every one of those and put and then we had to go to the Dropbox every night, and we had to do the bank statements and do it was so much more labor intensive. It's so nice that a lot of that automation has come to where you can really concentrate more on the actual claims themselves and what the denial was and was it a valid denial, then you are having a whole person whose all their job is stamping checks and do that it really affects the flow of what revenue cycle people can do now. So that it's just amazing to me that all of
Yes.
that new stuff has come in. And then reporting, for any billing service that at least that my colleagues that all have them, there's also a lot of reporting that has to be done. You're looking at your AR, you're looking at your outstanding claims, you're looking at balances. Some billing services run and also do the collection service and all of that. So, you also have that end of it where you're having to get into all that piece. So people that do RCM really have to kind of know all of that to make it flow through, especially if you're doing it as a service for clients, not just, in a part of a practice, you might be compartmentalized, but for somebody like you that has a billing service, you've got to be on it for all pieces of it, right?
Yes. Absolutely. Yep. And it's interesting to watch sometimes. The larger the practice, the more it's broken out and different groups of people own a piece of the pie and they never see that pie as a whole. When you're in the smaller practice, you don't have enough staff to do that. And so you do find that your staff that's working regardless of what the position is, they're all wearing many hats. I think I saw a lady say earlier that she learned to room patients. I can
Yep.
give B12 and flu shots. I know how to take a blood pressure. I haven't done it in a very long time. I used to know how, I should say. But I can do an EKG because we learn to work together as a team. And I think within the revenue cycle, a lot of times there is contention between your front end revenue and your back end revenue. And at the end of the day, dudes, we're all on the same team. And if the back end is seeing errors that are being made because of mistakes at the front end, we need to have a conversation about it and understand maybe something within the practice management system isn't working correctly, and that's what's causing the problem. Maybe somebody doesn't know something they do need to know. And so it becomes an education opportunity instead of a competition. And we need to first and foremost recognize, everybody needs to recognize they're all on the same team, regardless of how large the health system is.
Yep.
Um,
Well, one thing I did, Natasha, hey Natasha, by the way, she says, I've worked in all aspects of revenue cycle, and I agree each position is important. One of the things I did, because we had a little of what you were saying, Pam, going on when I was the director of this one practice, where the people in the back end were all, oh, with those people up front get the right information, the people in the front end, were saying, well, they're always up here and they're bugging us. But yeah, so what I did was I had the people from the back, I took them individually and I would have them come up front and I would have them work the front desk for a day. And then where they're having to do the phones and do the insurance things and talk to the patients, and the patients are complaining because you asked me for that the last time I came in and no, it hasn't, and so they had to go through all of that stuff. And then they were like, oh, okay. I said, now do you see why maybe they forgot to get that patient's name correctly spelled, or they maybe
exactly.
transposed a letter there, how that could happen when there's 12 people standing at the front desk, two people waiting to check out, and the phone's ringing and you're trying to do this. And they're like, yeah, okay. And then I took the front desk people and I had them all do into the back end where they're looking at the denials and the payment posting and calling the insurance companies and looking at the chart and having to pull the chart to look and see if that code was supported for it. And they're like, wow, so having that understanding, I think that's a great experience for RCM people too, is to kind of get a little taste of what everybody does. I think it helps them. They really appreciated each other more,
Absolutely.
and so every position in RCM, no matter where it is in the chain, is vitally important, because one thing that falls out, it's like that domino thing, right? One piece is out and then it kind of stops, and then that's where you get your problems. So every piece is vital. I totally agree with that.
Yep. And it's too funny. You and I must be twins, because I had to do that exact same thing at the orthopedic practice when I went to work there, because it was bad. It was cat fights. We are a female dominated world. There's a lot of estrogen flowing, and they were angry with each other all the time. And I'm like, oh no, this isn't going to work. So,
Yeah. Oh,
but
somebody, back to your apple thing, Veronica, says coders have a lots of apples that fall
yes, they
around.
do.
So
Oh
when
my
we're
goodness.
looking at the stuff, as I was saying, for RCM for 2022, so um, the things that we're looking for to make sure we're starting the year off well, what would be things like, what are you telling your clients now to make sure they're getting done when patients are coming for their appointments?
My biggest thing to every one of my practices is we do not ask about insurance. We lay eyeballs on the cards. And quite frankly, I think that should be done at every visit, because you ask the patient, did anything change with your insurance? There are a lot of patients on Medicare that don't understand that Humana Medicare Advantage and Medicare Red, White, and Blue are not the same thing.
I know.
They still have Blue Cross and Blue Shield, but their prefix has changed. Patients don't pay attention to things the same way we do when it comes to the insurance. And so quickly that becomes an area of, has anything changed with your insurance? No. Well, not according to the patient. And oh, by the way, the patient can't see what we have in our system. So they don't know what we have to answer that question at all. And the same thing goes with our demographics. Has anything changed since last year? Has your phone number changed since last year? No. Well, no, 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 no. Okay, I've got this phone number that ends in 8527. Is that still your primary contact number? It is. Okay, great. Or no, I changed my number 4 months ago. I forgot I haven't given it to you yet. We've got to be very specific in the information that we're asking for. And that starts with, sometimes it means having them update their patient demographic sheet each year, at least annually.
Yeah.
But without a doubt, insurance cards in our hands, in front of our eyeballs, so that we can make sure we have the right information.
Yeah, I think you're right on that. I found because if a patient presents up to somebody and the question is, has anything changed? Well, one, they're not going to want to be hassled with doing anything, and two, they're not thinking of everything they sometimes it just goes by them, and their automatic response is always like no, unless it happened yesterday. They're going to say no. So yeah, I think that the way that you ask them, about their insurance and their addresses and all of those things, that how you did, well, like, is this still your current phone number? And then say it ending in whatever, and then the thing is yes. And I totally agree with the whole Medicare thing. Well, I have Medicare. Well, actually, yeah, you don't have traditional Medicare. You have, and then you start getting in that they don't understand any of that. So, yeah, that's why I say that the front desk is, I think, one of the most critical parts, because that's where it all starts. If you don't have the good information, it doesn't matter what else goes on, it's all going to be for naught. So, those people have got to be invested in, they've got to be trained properly, and you have to really go with scenarios with them about how to go about things, how you want it to go. Maybe divide up what they're doing at the front desk, so you don't have one person that's trying to do four things at once.
Absolutely.
And then, they're the face of the practice. I've told it to physicians too. When a new patient walks in the door, do you want them to be greeted, or do you want them to see that there's a person behind the desk that's like going bananas because the phone's ringing off the hook and she's trying to make copies and she's trying to check somebody out, and it's too much. It makes it look like the whole practice is in chaos. That's their first view of what that practice is.
Exactly. And we taught the front offices, first of all, you cannot outsource your front office. You can outsource your billing, you can outsource the whole rest of your revenue cycle, but you cannot outsource your front office. That is where your investment needs to be. And those people that are working the front desk, because they are the face of your practice, they are the first impression a new patient gets, they should be the gracious hostess and be able to make patients feel like they are their best friend in the whole wide world. They've got to be confident so that they can ask patients for things that the patients don't want to do, like fill out paperwork or give up money, and do it with making the patient feel good the whole time. They have got to be empathetic and be able to de-escalate a situation, because if a patient comes in and they don't feel good, a lot of times their mood is bad and they're pissed off because they couldn't find a parking space and this other thing happened and that other thing happened, and they've got to be able to get that patient down to ground zero again.
Yep.
And that's the job of that front desk, in addition to making sure all the information's correct. So
Yes. Yeah, they have to have that also personality skill. So that was another thing I wanted to discuss, is like personalities. You Not everybody has a personality to be on the front desk. and that's why some people like working, in the back end and work back on the, the coding the denials management side of it, because they just don't have it. Not that there's, one's better than the other. I tell you, I've been, when I was young in my career, I was one where the clinic was you did the front desk for part of the day, and then the person that was in the back would spell you and take over at the front desk, and then you would go do the back desk. So I actually would do both during the day, and there were many days when I was like, I cannot wait until it is noon, because if one more
Yep.
patient comes in here complaining about something, I think I'm going to lose my job. So I
Yep.
don't think knowing myself, I couldn't do it day in, day out, every day with, people. So some people are just nasty. And like you said, sometimes they're in pain, they don't feel good, or something else has happened, and you're just the first person in front of them, and you're just going to get it. And that's hard to sit there and, just keep smiling and appeasing people.
Absolutely.
It takes a certain personality to be able to do that. So I think for people that are looking for people for those positions too, don't get somebody in a position that, is not going to really fit with them. Maybe they're good in the RCM cycle, but somewhere else.
Yeah.
I think that's something to consider for people looking to do this, is that, because a lot of, I think, initial first time kind of positions people look for, everybody says, oh, front desk, front desk. That's just not for everybody. But,
Correct.
I think there's a lot of back end things that newer people can do, like you had said, validating things, and, just getting your hands into things and looking at the claims and looking at denials and seeing what's going on with them. But people have to be given time to like learn. I think that's something that's all practices, just because of the economy and inflation, and they're trying to get whatever money they can. Everything's always like now, 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 and they expect you to like learn everything in 2 days, or that kind of thing, where people really need to be given time, because this is the finances of your practice we're talking about here.
Exactly. And I have to say, and I know we're not talking about this in particular, but there's a lot of complaints about people who have gone out and gotten their CPCA and they can't find a job. They've never worked in the healthcare industry before. I don't look for a coding job. You haven't earned it yet. You've passed a test, you have some knowledge, but you haven't earned that coding job yet. And oh, by the way, you may find it to be the most boring thing you've ever done in your entire life. I cannot sit and code all day. It would drive me crazy. I have to have plenty of other things interspersed if I'm coding. But look for those other jobs in the revenue cycle, including the front desk, if you've got that personality, because that's what's going to get you in the door, and you're going to start seeing all of the pieces that fit together in order to make the revenue cycle successful, to make the practice successful. And ultimately, if you see all those pieces that fit together and how they work together, then if you want to take your career to the next level, you've started building that foundation to be able to move to the next level.
Yeah, and then to understand of how those things work when you're doing the coding, about the importance of, that billing side of it, to have that
Right.
understanding, will make you a better coder, if that's kind of
Absolutely.
your end game. Um,
Absolutely. You get that exposure
yeah.
and completely understand. And Beth and I were talking, my friend Beth Schleifer that's on here, we were talking earlier about personalities in the revenue cycle. And when I went to work at the orthopedic practice, I had a staff of 25. And the way that they were structured when I started there is they had their coders kind of on one side of the room, four of them, and then everybody else was a collector. And but they were not separated by insurance companies. They were separated by
Mm,
providers,
mm.
and the girls worked everything that had to do with a provider. Well, if you have to get on the phone with an insurance company, if it's not something that can be resolved online, You may be on the phone for a hot minute, and
Oh
yet
yeah.
all of the patient phone calls were getting transferred to their desk, and they didn't want to leave the patients not answered, so they'd hang up with the insurance company. It was totally ineffective. And I had several women, a lot of them were a little bit older. They were in the end of their careers when I went to work there. Um, they could be just as firm and hold an insurance company to the fire for us to get paid what we were rightfully due. But if they got on the phone with a patient, they would tell them, "Oh, it's okay. Don't worry about it." And I literally had one that 2 times that I know of sent money to a patient to help the patient
Oh
because the patient was complaining of, and I don't know if she really was or not, but in a hard time. Those are not the right people to be doing back end patient collections. They are
right.
perfect for doing your insurance follow up.
Yeah.
I had 2 staff members in there. One of them had actually worked for a healthcare collection agency in the past. She was very comfortable talking to patients and asking them for money and saying, "No, it's not okay that you pay us $2 a month. Let's come
Right.
up with a reasonable payment plan." Those we quickly restructured so that our insurance follow-up only did insurance follow-up, and we
Yeah.
had people who dealt with the patient phone calls. And, when I started working there, they were not collecting deposits for surgeries. Well, once we moved that piece to people that just dealt with doing patient money, once we got the authorizations for the surgeries, they would calculate what the patient's responsibility would be and call the patient, and you didn't have surgery if you didn't pay your deductible. And so it changed our revenue cycle significantly in multiple ways just by identifying the right personalities for the
Yep.
jobs that were being done.
Yep. I think that's something, not just looking at a person's skill, education, certification. It's also you got to take that personality into consideration. Um,
Yeah.
just like with coding, I know some coders that are wonderful, can tell you guidelines back and forth, but you put them in front of a physician to discuss audit results or something, they're
Nope.
like, no. I mean, I had one that would fake she was sick every time she was supposed to go. It's like, oh, I don't think I'm feeling good today. I said every time there was some excuse, she would start calling off when she knew she was scared. And I was like, okay, this is not working. You're great at what you're doing. You're great at looking at documentation and coding, but you cannot. It's just, she would just like sweat, and it was just killing her. So I was
Yeah.
like, okay, let's take that piece off for you, and we'll have you look at some other things and do some straight coding up front where you're not having to worry about this. And because it's not fun for the employee either, because then they're hating their job, they don't like this certain aspect of it, and they're getting all anxious and nervous and stuff. So you want them to be happy, you want it to be productive what they're doing. So you have
Absolutely.
to make sure everything is kind of matching up with people. So looking at some of our comments here, we have Veronica saying, it helps to have a thorough checklist for the entire RCM when training staff, because like many people have already said, everybody's involved in some way. So when you do training, Pam, do you have, and I know I don't call them cheat sheets. I don't like how that sounds. So I call them job aids. I make job aids for people. So do you have things like that when you're training and things to make sure that people are getting everything that they need in there?
I have a list of what needs to be accomplished, and I have screenshots that show how to get somewhere to do it in the system.
Right.
But partially because of my own personality, I believe that if people write their own, they remember it better. And so I don't write their cheat sheets, I make them do it themselves. I give them something to guide them.
Great. And then we have, we need to understand our own strengths. Are we people, bubbly and friendly, or introverted and nerdy? Each has a value. So that was like what we were talking about. So that's a great point. Yeah, I mean, you can be really great at
Yeah.
what you're doing, but there's certain aspects that maybe that we can kind of tweak, and that all comes with working with the staff and understanding and people speaking up too. Because a lot of people, that's one of the things that's like, I hate this. Well, why didn't you ever say anything? So if you have that one part that's just like, I just don't shine at this, there's nothing wrong with that. That's not saying you're a bad person, or that you're deficient somehow. That's just not your thing. And maybe there's somebody else in the office who's just chomping at the bit because that is their thing, and they hate the other piece that you would be able to do. So, everybody can kind of, I think one of the good things is that you don't have to have rigid so much positions for certain things. You can have a lot of where people are covering for each other and doing different things. And I think that makes for a better working office, at least in my, in my mind and my experience when I've been directors and things like that of offices, of how I've let people do it. I'm like, okay, we're going to have that meeting. And, the biggest thing is y'all just have to tell me. I said, I'm not going to bite your head off. I said, we're trying to find ways to make everybody happy and make the office run efficiently,
Right.
so having those discussions is great.
I
And
agree.
lady, she said, patience and compassion are important. You have to think that they could be you in the future or a family member. That's a very good thing at the front desk for people to try to remember too. That when the patients are angry, just like when I'm working with docs and the doc's kind of not the nicest to me, they're not mad at me. Just like the patient, especially if you've got a relationship with those patients where you see them a lot, they're not mad at you. They're mad about something else, and you just happen to be in front of them. So, trying to be gracious about it. And I'm sure, I've had many situations where once the physician or APP has calmed down, they've apologized and the whole, but you can't take that stuff personal. That is one thing that you do have to learn in what we do, is that you can't take that stuff personally, whether it be
Exactly
from
right.
a physician or a patient, or it's really usually, unless you've said something like to deserve something, it's really not about you, probably not at all. We have Carl adding a little bit more specificity to what we were talking about. 8 steps in the medical billing process: financial responsibility, registering the patient check-in and check-out, compliance, encoding, preparing and transmitting claims, adjudication, generating statements, and collections. That's kind of what we were talking about, but I had it into 4 bigger groups. But yeah, this is exactly, no matter, I looked on if you look on Google or Bing or whatever you use to do that kind of stuff, and you put out RCM, you'll get just a bajillion different circles that have all kind of breakdowns in it. So some of them, I saw one that was like the infinity sign that had so many into it that they had to make an infinity sign to fit on the page. So, I mean, you can micro break it down. And so Carl, those are all very, very good pieces that fit into the larger 4 phases I was talking about. But yes, yes.
I do
Yeah.
have to say though, it is correct, and that's how the cycle flows. But if we take care of the financial responsibility at the front, we can eliminate 7 and 8.
This is very true. Yeah, yeah. Well, and that's the thing with when I was in, and because this is okay, y'all, this is how old I am. When I first was in, we didn't have HMOs. There was no HMOs when I was first in practices. Okay. So everybody paid what they owed, everybody had their thing. And, we would give them the encounter form so they could get paid back from the insurance. Right. And once HMOs started coming out, and at first there were no copays. And so it was a free for all. Then when you started putting like a $2 copay on things, patients lost their mind. They didn't want to pay those copays, and why couldn't we just bill? And so that's how I think all that with these co-insurances and copayments started, where front desk, they just weren't asking, and so if you don't ask a patient, I've come many times where I would have my handbag and I would put it up on the counter, and if you're not going to ask me for money, I'm just not going to give it to you. So, if you tell the patient before they go to see the doctor, they have to make that copayment, then you're going to have that up front and not have to worry about that on the back end. You're very right on that, Pam.
Well, and those are the 2 most expensive things in the revenue cycle. If we get everything else right, but we're not collecting at the front end, collecting when the patient's being seen. Um, it costs money to send statements.
Yep.
And if we send 2 statements and the patient hasn't paid, they are not likely to pay us unless they're seen every 3 months and they're just one of those patients that waits till they come
They're
in for their
waiting.
next appointment
Yeah.
to pay, right? Um, spending money on staff to call patients and chase those balances is a waste of money. Whether you have internal revenue cycle or you've got it outsourced, if patients are not responding to your statements, then you send them on to collections and let collections deal with it
Yep. Yep.
because it is
Agree.
a waste of the practice money to chase bad money.
Yeah. Yeah. And I didn't realize until I just looked down now, we are at our end of our hour. I know, isn't it? So we are
That
going
went
to have to
fast.
end here. But Pam, we've had such great discussions and we still have a ton of things coming in. So maybe we'll have to have you come back for a part 2 soon so
That
that
would
we
be
can,
great.
go through some of the comments and just, kind of hit on some of those things. So thank you so much for joining me. In Pam's, I will add Pam's LinkedIn profile. You can find Pam on LinkedIn. So check her out there and you can connect with her. And for those of y'all that are not familiar with me, same thing here. You can connect with me on LinkedIn and we're happy to, finish these discussions up. But hopefully Pam will come back for us soon. So thanks everybody for joining me today. Pam, any last words or tips or anything like that before we close out?
Whatever you do, put eyes on the insurance cards and have a happy new year.
Good. Well, thanks y'all. Have a good weekend and happy new year. Yeah, that's right. So it's our first one in the new year. So we'll see you next time when we see what else is happening in healthcare.
Thanks, Betty.